of the controversies or maybe just conspiracy theories tied to you, your brother, and the Podesta group. So whether that's your personal email leak as it relates to Pizzagate, the undisclosed 75,000 shares of stock you received from the Kremlin, potentially violating financial disclosure laws, Uranium One being a client of the Podesta group, why your brother left the Podesta group after facing criminal inquiry. As an aspiring person in politics, I'm curious as to how you're dealing with all of these accusations. Thank you.
This is how the alt-right does fake news. You know, and it's personally painful because a lot of this is really total bullshit.
Oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive. I think you'll love what happened to Hillary recently. So a heckler forced her to address the Pizzagate allegations in front of a brainwashed audience of ideological zealots.
Let me tell you, this is how deep the rot goes. You have people on the right who made up this horrible, terrible story that John Podesta and I were running a child trafficking ring in the basement of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. Now you laugh about it or you moan about it. A lot of people saw that, and some misguided souls actually believed it, right? Because they saw it on the internet.
And the reason this moment I think is so significant is not because any of the liberal abortion lovers in the audience were swayed, but rather that Hillary has to and will have to address these allegations for the rest of her pathetic life, and hopefully one day soon in a courtroom. Because the truth is the truth. It's eternal and unchanging. No lobbyist can alter or abolish it, and no DC think tank can destroy it. It just is. And sooner or later, it rises to the top. And the truth about Pizzagate, John Podesta, and Hillary Clinton that her audience doesn't know or want to know is that the global problem of child sex trafficking is now well known. And as it pertains to John Podesta specifically, he's a world-class, underage sex slave op cover-upper who defends unspeakable dregs, according to Andrew Breitbart in 2011. How the whole world doesn't already know that truth escaped Breitbart.
What's in your closet, John Podesta? Big Podesta? Big Soros?
And Podesta will have to live with the allegations for the rest of his miserable life as well.
My family and I have been put through this Pizzagate bullshit for a year, which has been totally debunked.
Of course, in 2011, no one had heard about the Pizzagate allegations or Comet Ping Pong.
I know people who bring their children to go to this pizzeria, which is in a really nice commercial area in Washington, and it's got ping pong, so the kids play ping pong, they eat pizza.
Or James Alefantis, whose connection to the Podesta brothers and Hillary Clinton is now well documented, as is their connection to Marina Abramovic and spirit cooking, a practice that traces back to a cannibalistic Roman pagan sex cult that worshipped Antinous, the underage boy and lover of Roman Emperor Hadrian. Hillary's liberal audience doesn't know, nor do they want to know such truths, like the fact that Comet Ping Pong owner James Alefantis, whose Jimmy Comet Instagram avatar appears to be Antinous. The beautiful thing about truth is that it doesn't fear light, but lies do, which is why John Podesta never sued Andrew Breitbart for alleging that he's an underage sex slave op cover-upper. It's the same reason journalists like Liz Crokin can tweet even more direct allegations about Podesta, calling him a pedophile. And the liars that be don't even have the power of the threat of a lawsuit any longer because the truth media has the power of the collective. One whisper of a suit would result in a Kickstarter or GoFundMe campaign that would raise tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars for a legal defense fund. And the liars know it. These maggots are losing their power with each passing day. And we know exactly who these people are. We know what they do in the darkness. And they are terrified that soon the whole world will know the truth. And one more thing about truth. Like murder, there is no statute of limitations on it. which ought to put the fear of God into MSNBC Morning Joe host Joe Scarborough. President Trump's tweet has re-sparked the memory of Lori Klasutis, who was Joe's young intern, who was found dead in Joe's congressional office in Florida in 2001. The investigation was botched at best. The autopsy just as questionable as the coroner's past relationship to Joe. And now, thanks to President Trump, very important questions which have never been adequately answered are being re-asked. Like, where was Joe Scarborough at the time of Lori's fatal injuries? And if Joe Scarborough was in Washington, D.C., as has been suggested, why would Lori have scheduled an 8 a.m. appointment for him in Fort Walton Beach, Florida? If he was in Florida and had no prior knowledge of Lori's death, why didn't he show up for his 8 a.m. appointment? Once these questions have been answered and vetted as being true or false, Joe's name will either be cleared or it will be time.
Joining me now to address all of these questions and topics, John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. Thank you so much for being here today. We appreciate it.
Glad to be with you.
Now, we've been keeping an eye on the forum there in Simi Valley that brings together defense contractors, members of the administration to talk about military readiness. And we have the opportunity to listen to the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, speak, as well as the interview with our own anchor, Brett Baer, the follow-up. He asked McMaster what the greatest threat facing America was. Not particularly shocking answer. He said North Korea. I'd also like to get your assessment on that.
Well, I think North Korea is part of it, but I think the threat as a whole, the strategic threat, is the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction more broadly. Including chemical and biological weapons. That's why I think President Trump's strike against the Assad regime in Syria for the use of chemical weapons was a very, very important aspect of this. And I frankly don't think you can divorce North Korea from Iran. I think cooperation between Iran and North Korea, historically on ballistic missiles and almost certainly on the nuclear side, puts them together. And it's part of a bigger strategic picture, and that is, if North Korea or Iran or both get a deliverable nuclear weapons capability, I'm afraid that decades of counterproliferation efforts led by the United States will have failed. And I think this will be a massive failure of American national security policy and presage proliferation of weapons of mass destruction to countless other countries. So this is not a one-off with North Korea. This is determining whether the 21st century, I think, will be a world where many, many more countries, dozens more countries, get nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, or whether we can draw the line here.
You know, as you're bringing that up, we just have some very recent reporting from our own national security correspondent, Jennifer Griffin, who also happens to be on the ground out there in California, speaking about this latest ballistic missile launch on the part of North Korea, and that it broke up on reentry. It's a hurdle they haven't been able to get past, one that apparently protects us, at least for now, from a warhead actually striking the continental United States. I mean, is there any relief in that, or do you think North Korea is actually getting very, very close, as we've seen them advance so rapidly recently?
No, I think General McMaster made the correct point that every launch brings them closer to the objective, whether every aspect of it succeeds or not. In the 1950s, when Vanguard and Jupiter C missiles were blowing up on launch pads in the United States, our rocket scientists, and they were rocket scientists, would describe these catastrophes as 90% successes. And the reason was that they had to know where the weak spots were in their science and their engineering. You know, it's not at all clear what was under the nose cone of the rocket on this most recent launch, and therefore we can't really tell what that implies once they put a thermonuclear warhead under it. So I think we've still got some time. I don't think that, for example, if we launched a preemptive strike against North Korea's nuclear program, that they could retaliate by hitting the United States with nuclear weapons. But our intelligence is imperfect, and that's why there is precious little time to make a decision whether there's any prospect of North Korea denuclearizing on its own or under Chinese pressure, or whether we're going to have to use military force. We can't blink at this any longer. That's the choice we're coming up to very, very rapidly.
Ambassador, something you just touched on briefly a moment ago when you talked about the proliferation of weapons around the world. McMaster talked about how all of these challenges have essentially brought our allies together, that now we're working to a greater degree with South Korea, with Japan. Is that something we're seeing on fronts all around the globe with rogue regimes, not just North Korea, but as you mentioned, Iran?
Well, I think the record here is divided. I mean, I think South Korea, for example, is very split internally on how to handle the North Korean threat. But let's not forget, just a few days before President Trump's recent Asia trip, Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, agreed with China on no further deployments of the THAAD air defense system, no trilateral cooperation with the U.S. and Japan on missile defense, and no trilateral defense alliance with Japan and the United States. Now, that's been his position for a long time. That's very dangerous.
All right, Ambassador, I hate to cut you off, but I'm getting a wrap here. Thank you so much for your insights.
Glad to be with you.